Well, it's not just the Federation of Canadian Municipalities looking for more from Ottawa, so is the Business Council of Canada. But rather than more spending, the Council wants more prudence, concerned about the government's rising debt and what that would mean for future investments into the country. With more, we're now joined by Goldy Hyder, President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Goldy, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Listen, I'll begin with the opening line of your press release, which said the federal government's fall fiscal update fails to set the country's finances on a sustainable path. How does it fail to do so?
Well, look, this is a government that has not had a very good track record on a number of things. One is it spends a lot of money. And two is whatever it says it was going to spend, it ends up spending more. Okay? Three is they make a bunch of assumptions that are very favorable on economic growth, but not so much on the spending side in terms of bringing that down. And when those things don't add up, if you have inflation, if you have the possibility, which this this economic statement completely rules out of any kind of a recession, which is shocking, given what we're seeing in many parts of the world and the likelihood that we may well have a slowdown. So the consequence really, Michael, is that leads to a credibility problem. And that's what we're saying here. We have a track record we can look at. And I think that's why what you're seeing today, the day after, the morning after and the day after, is people are really seized with a fiscal question in this statement. Okay, but the Trudeau government does point to its debt to GDP ratio. They say it continues and will continue to go down in the years to come. And they also say that that ratio is the best of all G7 countries, rather. What's wrong with that analysis? Look, first of all, they've had moving targets on what it is that they measure. They used to be called a fiscal anchor. It became guardrails. Now it's coming back, and they used to be debt to GDP ratio. Now it's the GDP ratio versus borrowing. It's all mumbo jumbo to the average Canadian out there. The question really is, are we spending too much money? And the answer is yes. And here's what concerns us. We genuinely agree with any government that says we're here to help the Canadian people. The way you help the Canadian people is not by making them broke, is not by spending more than you make. It's by growing our economy so that the programs that are being announced have long-term validity and sustainability. There is no point announcing something if it's going to get cut or canceled outright because somewhere down the road we're not going to be able to afford it. And as far as the comparisons go, I can give you 20 other stats about where we're struggling on growth and so forth. I think what Canadians are more concerned with is what's happening in Canada, what's happening at home, what are the things that we can do to control our own destiny, and not be worried about, are we taller than the shortest person in the room? That doesn't matter. You're still short.
Okay. Well, one thing that your organization is suggesting is to limit the cost that it takes to service Canada's debt. And by that, you want to limit the federal government to no more than 10% of the revenue going to service that debt. Wouldn't that mean massive cuts to actually reach that target?
No, again, there's two sides to this ledger here, right? Let's grow our economy. Let's work on having a long-term growth strategy. Let's work on our productivity challenges. Why don't business and government and labor and Indigenous groups come together and say, where can we find the opportunity to bring about economic growth? I travel the world and people say, it must be so great to be Canada. You have everything the world really wants. You've got energy, you've got food, you've got critical minerals, you've got proximity to the United States, you've got trade agreements, you've got clean electricity, you're an innovative society, you've got immigration policy. Let's use these assets in our country to put more emphasis on the growth side of the agenda. It seems to me that this is a government that spent far too much time in trying to basically redistribute the wealth that's trying to be created, as opposed to expand the pie and grow it.
Okay, expand the pie and grow it, but that does take time, and right now up against that are housing concerns and child care and dental care, EV battery plants. Are those not worthwhile to go into debt in the short term to try to bring about the kind of growth that you're referencing?
Well, look, when it comes for some of these programs were already announced in previous iterations of budgets with a fiscal framework of some kind. What we're concerned by here is there is no fiscal framework. You cannot say that we're going to be fiscally responsible, but not tell me how. And so what we've been saying is very specifically what the so-called David Dodge model is: just bring your spending under control so that borrowing costs don't increase or are not in excess of 10% of your revenues. This way, it forces you to have some discipline on the program announcements and make sure that we have the growth to support it. currently, as things are tracking, I think it's very convenient that this year the deficit is showing to be exactly what was forecasted just 9 months ago. It's the first time they've ever been able to do that, actually. But it looks more like moving a shell game here, or a little bit of gerrymandering going on, because the deficit grows as we go further down the road. In fact, we've been using the analogy, and I know others have picked it up, that you're about to spend the same amount of money on borrowing costs that you're spending on healthcare. That is a shocking statistic for Canadians to hear.
Goldy, always appreciate the thoughts. Thank you for the time today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
That's Goldy Hyder.